Well, cool. Well, I think we're about ready to begin. I know there are probably be a few people will still come into the waiting room as we continue. I want to thank everyone for making time today. I'm going to hand it off uh, to Dr. Garcia in just a minute. I want to make a couple notes. First, make sure you silence all of your. No, wait, never mind. That doesn't make any sense. Wanted to just note, first of all, for everyone that we are recording this presentation and it will be uploaded to YouTube. So if that's something you're not comfortable with, that's fine. Just make sure you keep your camera off, and that way your video won't be included as part of that video. We can make sure of that. The other note was that after the presentation this evening, we'll have a brief time for some Q&A, and you can feel free to send any of those questions to me and or Dr. Garcia, and we'll make sure that we sort of field those questions and get time for that. So feel free to either put those in the general chat or message them to one of us directly. And with that in mind, I will hand it over to Tracy.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Dr. and Mrs. Gary Bremer Colloquium Series. We are able to have seasoned researchers come here and speak to us due to the generosity of Dr. and Mrs. Bremer, and Dr. and Mrs. Bremer are here. So on behalf of the Psych Department faculty, I extend our appreciation to you. So Dr. Alyssa Wilson is our guest speaker tonight. I don't know where she is, but she's up here for me. And Dr. Wilson is an associate professor and the department chair of applied behavior analysis programs at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Southern California. And is also a board certified behavioral analyst doctoral, as well as a licensed behavior analyst. Dr. Wilson earned her PhD in rehabilitation with an emphasis in behavior analysis and therapy from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Her research focuses on how humans make decisions and engage in maladaptive behavior to determine intervention strategies for behavioral change. In that vein, Dr. Wilson has published articles on assessment and treatment of challenging behaviors and acceptance of mindfulness-based intervention strategies. Her research on gambling has been presented at over 50 national and international venues and has been showcased on Bill Nye Saves the World, so that's pretty cool. Additionally, Dr. Wilson is the associate editor for Behavior Analysis and Practice and serves on several editorial boards for a range of journals, including the Journal of Contextual Behavior Science and Perspectives of Behavior Science. Without further ado, here's Dr. Wilson.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I do not have screen sharing ability. So whoever the host is, thanks, Sean. I wanted just to say thank you so much for extending the invitation to allow me to talk about my research today. I'm very honored and humbled by it. Thank you to Dr. and Mrs. Bremer for this opportunity as well.
Should be good to go now. Sorry about that, Alyssa.
Oh, you're fine. All right. Let's see. Now you can see everything. There we go. So today we're going to talk about understanding problem gambling in today's world, particularly from how I like to call the curious case of risk, rules, and real-time accessibility. And I see somebody is in the waiting room. It just popped up on my screen. Does that mean that I have to let them in? Okay. Well, this should be good. You're all going to test my skills here. Okay. Like before we begin, I always like to give my audience warnings around what's forthcoming, and some of the content that I show today may be sensitive to those in recovery. Please take care of yourself and do whatever you need to do throughout this presentation. And no need to share, just kind of take care of yourself throughout. I also want to start by just letting you know that the majority of what I'm going to speak about today can also be found in my new book with my fabulous colleague, Jody Bechtold, who is a licensed clinical social worker. You can get it now on Amazon, or if you want, head on over to gamblingdisorderbook.com and you can get an author signed copy. We have a limited number of those, but it's the same price on Amazon as it is on the gamblingdisorderbook.com. One of the things that we wanted to make sure about when we wrote this book was that it was easily accessible to clinicians. So it's a $40 book either on Amazon or if you do the signed copy. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So what is gambling? Sometimes people want to take a more literal or kind of legal perspective of what gambling is. And according to the law, gambling is any activity that when a person pays something of value to participate in an event that presents the possibility of winning something of value, like a prize, whose outcome is determined at least in part by chance. According to Gamblers Anonymous, however, gambling is any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, no matter how slight or insignificant, where the outcome is uncertain or depends upon chance or skill, will then constitute gambling. This is important because when you work in clinical practice with folks who have problem or disordered gambling, most of the times people want to say things like poker isn't a form of gambling because it's skill-based. Like I can somehow beat the odds because I quote unquote know how to play. Similarly, sports betting can also be considered something that's skill-based because I now know the spread or I at least follow the teams. And so I like to kind of think about this as a conglomerate of both the legal definition as well as the GA definition. And so we really want to think about gambling as anytime something of value or a commodity in some aspect is wagered or kind of placed on a particular bet in hopes of getting something of larger value in return. And what's important to remember is that unlike maybe 20 or 30 years ago when you only could go to a casino to play, gambling now today is literally everywhere, okay? Casinos are typically the most common or traditional way to think about where to go to game. And you can see here with this picture that I just took in Nevada before actually everything shut down. So this was in January of 2020, that no longer are we just looking at a 3-reel slot machine. Now we have these massive screens, sometimes 4, 5, 6 screens done into one. This here is just one slot machine. But what about when you then see in airports, and now it's also still one slot machine, but larger than life, right? And so this is actually in the Vegas airport. But that's just one part of it, right? You can't even drive along the road anymore without seeing billboards that not just kind of to advertise lottery, but now here with this example of Pac-Man, they're combining what most of millennials and people in my generation even can remember playing way back in the day. And now all of a sudden they're paired with go play a lotto ticket or a scratch off, right? My personal favorite, right? You can also gamble in the grocery store. Okay, so this is just like on your way out, go ahead and take a seat next to the video poker machine or the Game King to kind of press your luck with the change that you have. Or what about if you're just on your way to eat with your family and now you have to walk past the kiosk, the scratch off kiosk on your way to sit at your table. Or, and here is where something that might be triggering to those in recovery, what if you just go to McDonald's and try to order a hamburger? And even trying to order a hamburger, sorry, at Burger King, not at McDonald's, at Burger King, you cannot escape the gambling imagery. It is literally everywhere. So no longer can we just say, well, avoid going to your drug dealer's house or avoid going to the bar, because you cannot avoid driving your car or eating at restaurants or going in an airport. Gambling is everywhere. So where can you gamble in the US? Anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess besides Dr. Bordieri, because I know he will know this? Oh, somebody's got the chat feature going and it's me that's slow to it. Everywhere online. Yeah, there's 2 states actually in the US that don't have any form of legalized gambling. Those states would be Hawaii and Utah. Although to that person's credit, not yet anyway, right? And we'll talk about this when we talk about online expansion and sports betting. So besides Hawaii and Utah, right, you can get access some type of gambling through poker, horse races, casinos, bingo, lottery, etc., right, throughout all the other states. Now, interestingly, in Kentucky, Maybe you already know this, but there are 6 land-based casinos, 4 of which are located at horse tracks. And although you won't find traditional Vegas-style slot machines, you find what's called historic horse racing electronic gaming machines, which I was fascinated by when I was kind of researching Kentucky and what y'all have in Kentucky. And basically, this means that they take old winning outcomes and kind of spreads and whatnot of old horse races, and they apply it into a slot machine. So it's not technically a random ratio schedule where every single pull is independent of the next, because it's based upon some other horse racing experience years ago. You can also find bingo and lottery, and of course, parimutuel wagering. And I'm sure you all are aware of the Derby, right? I'm sure the Derby wouldn't be held in Kentucky if it wasn't legal to gamble on it. I'm pretty sure that's a safe bet to make. And if we wanted to just take a straw poll of those of you who are here tonight, how many of you at least watched the Derby or participated in some way, right? Did you get dressed up? Did you drink mint juleps? Did you perhaps place a bet? Chances are that at least a solid 70 to 80% of you did one or all 3 of those things, right? At least pre-pandemic. Now, what's interesting though, as soon as I can get control back on my computer, there we go, is that this is all kind of pre-online and technology expansion. And internet-based gambling began in the early 1990s. And in 1995, there was only a few sites that were offering casino type gambling games online without the need for real money to wager. There were some sports books that also started to create websites that listed their odds, as well as toll-free numbers that you could then pick up the phone to place bets on in the 90s. But all that changed in the mid-90s when they started to develop not just the internet, right? And so now all of a sudden we started to get internet faster speeds and kind of located not just in companies and organizations, but also in people's homes. But they also started to figure out technology to how to take credit cards in a safe way online. And once we were able to exchange money in a safe way online, there was a rapid expansion of online gambling, mostly legal at the time, that then followed. And now today, there is a real-time accessibility where anybody with a phone, a smartphone, a computer, a laptop, any access to Wi-Fi can go online and access pretty much anything they want to and place a bet, legal or otherwise, right? There's no real distinction around like, oh, it's illegal to bet online. Well, it is, but you can still get money. There are ways to get other forms of commodities like Bitcoin or other denominations that you can only pay or use online. So the thought that we can just say, oh, online is illegal and so we don't have to worry about that is false. And while I won't necessarily talk about it in my talk today, I think it is really important for those of you who are working with or want to consider working with problem gamblers to learn about blocking software. There's some really cool blocking software out there now, Gamban, for example, where you can download it onto your computer and it basically blocks any access to any type of gambling or illegal or otherwise forms of gambling on your computer. And that can really be a game maker in therapy. So why is this important? Well, with the real-time accessibility, remember, people can just pull out their phones and laptops and access gambling 365, 24/7. They don't have to leave their homes anymore. And now with the explosion and legalization of sports betting, now they can kind of broaden the scope and the span of what games they can play. So the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992, or the PASPA, was a law that made sports betting illegal at a federal level in most states, right? Outside of Nevada and aspects of New Jersey. So people like to say New Jersey, but it was really only Atlantic City. Everything else kind of was this weird gray fuzzy area. And so Over time, though, after that 1992 PASPA Act was passed, there became this socio-cultural support for sports gambling, with adults in various states starting to support legalization. Again, with this idea that people were doing it anyway, so why not actually legalize it as a way for states then to essentially tax it and make revenue from it? And so in May 2018, the US Supreme Court ruled that the 1992 ban on sports betting violated states' rights, which lifted the PASPA law and allowed the legalization of sports gambling to be the choice of individual states. And so if you think about that for a second, that meant that in 2018, right, the Supreme Court said, okay, that's lifted, it violates states' rights, any state can go about doing this. And when I move into the next slide, I'll show you what that means since those 2 years. But even before the overturn of the Supreme Court, there were some companies that found legal loopholes that allowed users to place bets on their phone for legal games. In Kentucky, for instance, right, horse racing has been legal since maybe the beginning of the state of Kentucky, and online bets were actually allowed, right? You could go on your phone, you could look up the spread, you could still place bets, particularly on the horse betting, on your phone, which technically, depending on how you define sports betting, right, fits that definition. These two pictures here, I like to draw your attention to how this is an example in Pennsylvania, who legalized sports betting a year following the Supreme Court ruling in 2018. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a 50-50 raffle. And this is something that you can download the app at the Penguin hockey game. When you're in the hockey rink watching the game, you download the app and you can then place bets using your credit or debit card throughout the game on a 50-50 raffle. Think about how dangerous that could be for somebody who might have a problem, because now you can just have continual access to credit and debit card usage. It's not like cash where you're not actually touching it and kind of feeling the pain of every time you bet money, etc. Similarly, on the right-hand side of the screen, this is what you can see if you're sitting either grabbing a beer, kind of in between, grabbing your seat, doing whatever you're doing at the game. And here is where you can then bet on the actual hockey game, and you can make wagers on who's going to start in the various settings of the game. I'm not a hockey player, forgive me, but so I know it's not an inning, but right. So if you have first half, second half, you can bet who's going to start, who's going to place it or make a goal first, who's going to get a foul first. You can make all these in real time game bets, which are very or can be very dangerous, particularly for people who have impulse control issues or who don't kind of access, what they're spending, because they're able to place these wagers on their credit card. Now, remember I told you to keep on, hold that Supreme Court date, right? So remember the Supreme Court lifted PASPA in 2018. And since that time, this figure was composed in 2020. So in 2 years, 42 states have either legalized sports betting and launched actual use of it, or they're pending the launch of the new games, or they are pending legislation in some capacity. Okay, 42 states. Think about that. In just 2 years, 40 states have opened the door to legally place sports bets, right? Kentucky, you can see here, is pending legislation. And also, so too is Hawaii. I highlight Hawaii because remember I told you a couple slides back that there were 2 states that didn't have any form of legalized gambling, Utah and Hawaii. Well, Utah, you can see here, it's located in the gray, no action. So it's holding strong with no, we will not have any form of legalized gambling, but Hawaii might change. That's going to be a big deal for at least for those of us in the gambling community, because now everyone's going to have to change up how we think about gambling, because Hawaii now you can actually would be able to gamble should that legislation pass. So this data here, I always like to highlight because this data was a U.S. consumer survey that was collected in 2017 that had just under 1,000 respondents aged 18 to 69 years old. And every single one of those slightly under 1,000 respondents had placed a sports bet in the past year. This data was collected in 2017, a year before the Supreme Court lifted and made it legal for states to pursue legislation. And I just would like to highlight a couple of things here. One, you can see that the majority of the sample, or 47%, bet on a sporting event with a friend, suggesting that this is already a normalized behavior or something that we as humans do to make friends or as a way to connect with people. Two, there was 28% of the sample placed a bet in an office pool, grid, or bracket. Again, so this was something that was happening regardless of whether or not the state said it was legal or not, and it's happening where people go to work every day. Now, the faculty in the room, or those of you who have real jobs, whatever that means. I don't know if I could put faculty in the same category as having real jobs or not. But think about what all your HR documents and how people tell you, you can't drink, you can't do drugs. Well, obviously that doesn't hold true for gambling, right? Because the 28% of these folks at least indicated that they had participated in an office pool, grid, or bracket, okay? And another thing to mention here, where is it? It's right here. DraftKings and FanDuel, right? So this is interesting. So maybe you've heard of DraftKings and FanDuel, but essentially those two platforms represent another fuzzy line of what's legal versus illegal when it comes to sports betting, right? So technically, most states do not recognize DraftKings and FanDuel as platforms or a form of gambling. Yet, interestingly, DraftKings now has a play responsible page on some of their state websites, suggesting that we may start to see more tightening of controls around how to protect players on these platforms. I will say that the state of New York has also started to look at DraftKings in particular as a form of gambling, but they are definitely on an island. They are not kind of the norm in terms of how states consider DraftKings or FanDuel. And again, just in case you don't know these two platforms, both DraftKings and FanDuel operate by allowing patrons to wager money on either a team to win or selecting players that then comprise a team. And if they win, they can win massive cash amounts. In fact, pre-COVID anyway, if you watch the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or even March Madness, you see all the commercials around DraftKings and FanDuel and how these people were winning millions of dollars because of how much they were betting and winning. Again, remember, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, why are we not calling it a duck? That sounds like gambling to me, right? Wagering a commodity in the hopes of getting a larger commodity in return. And one more comment I'll make is that this here, the none of the above, 27% indicated none of the above, but that was really because it didn't fit into any of the categories above here. So that doesn't suggest that 27% of this sample did not place a bet. It just meant that they placed a bet in a different way than what was represented above. So another fuzzy line or a fuzzy boundary around gambling is social casinos. Social casinos started back in the early 2000s with the kind of traditional brick and mortar, here's what a slot machine looks like just on your phone. And it really was really basic. You didn't have to use money or tokens. It was just really, as a fun thing to do. And then when we kind of get out of the early 2000s, now we start getting a little bit more interactive. You also see more like Big Fish. Big Fish is this image here. Oops. And you see way more kind of resemblance of how now people actually can use money to then get more tokens, or they pay money to actually then are more likely to hit bigger jackpots with tokens that then again can't be exchanged for real money, so to speak. But then fast forward to like 2015, 2016, social casinos now really can function, and some of them do function like a casino. So if you haven't heard of Coinmaster, I recommend you just do a quick Google search after tonight's talk and just look to see what happened with Coinmaster and how it expanded so fast, so quickly, so fast that people all of a sudden started to figure out a way that they could take their winnings, these tokens that they were winning online, and they then figured out a way to sell them on eBay to then turn them into cash. And so now you have this thing where it's not just play a slot machine, but it's engaging with this weird video game like thing that then gets you to this jackpot or slot machine casino game to then win more tokens. Again, it's a fuzzy boundary because legally there is no state laws around that say you can't have social casinos, but there's been interesting lawsuits now coming after particularly big fish, big game fish, because people have lost tens of thousands of dollars thinking they were just playing a video game when in fact it was really functioning more like a gambling operation. So as you can see, there is a single thread among some of the newer modalities and gambling activities beyond just the expansion of technology, right? This notion of wagering something of value or some type of commodity in the hopes of getting a larger prize or larger profit in return. And what is important to consider with the expansion is what we know about accessibility. We know that the closer you are to a gambling establishment, like a casino, the more likely you are to develop a problem with gambling. So think about what that then means for being able to access gambling on your phone or your computer 24/7, 365 days a year. You don't even have to leave your house to gamble. In fact, your spouse, your family, your friends may not even know that that's what you're doing on your phone when you're gambling. So therefore, our clinical approach to understanding gambling must be multifaceted to ensure that we correctly identify when and why gambling may be problematic and how to help protect gamblers from developing problems associated with these new games, particularly given the fact that they have real-time accessibility. All right, so then what is a problem gambling, or what is a problem gambler? What does that look like? Well, I like to think about it on a spectrum of sorts. And I like to think about it from like social gaming and problem gambling and disordered gambling. So when we think about social gambling, you think about gambling for entertainment, spending money within a set budget, right? So I say I'm going to go to the casino or down to the horse track. I'm only going to spend $50. When that $50 is gone, I'm able to end it, walk away, watch other people gamble until they're done, etc. Social gamblers will talk about money spent, right? And money spent as a form of entertainment, and oftentimes has pleasant social interactions with gambling. When we move then into moderate gambling problems or at risk for developing problems, typically here you start to see things like chasing losses, where after an evening of losing one shirt, so to speak, you will see them start to talk about how I got to go back and get it back. I have to go back to the boat. I have to go back to the casino. I got to go back to the bingo hall, wherever, to get it back. You also start to see beginning signs of lying or concealing how much gambling they're engaging in. You also see slight increases in depression and anxiety and high expenditures, meaning they're going to start to spend more and more money wherever it is that they're gambling. Interestingly enough, the majority of at-risk gamblers, depending on what study you look at, are represented by 18 to 25-year-olds, which isn't really that surprising to the neuropsychologists in the room who study brain development, because we know the prefrontal cortex, right, that stop system doesn't really stop developing until somewhere between 23, 26 years old, depending upon what study you're looking at. And so then when we start to think about problem or disordered gambling, now all of a sudden we start to see higher rates of depression and anxiety. They start to talk about gambling as a way to make money. They start to talk about money lost or money won, not money spent on gambling. You will also see them talking about how they have money and then they have gambling money. Like there's two forms of money from individuals who have more of a problem with gambling. You also see way more lying about gambling. You will see some engagement in crime or criminal activity to fund their gambling. And I cannot stress this enough. You see way higher rates, sometimes up to 5 times higher rates of suicidality or plans for suicide than any other mental health problem. So the one thing that I can hope that you get out of this talk is that you must have conversations with people that you think who might have a problem with gambling, because we know that gambling is considered a silent addiction because you can't see it like you can, say, drug or alcohol use. And because of that, we know that they are way more likely to have thoughts or even plans to die by suicide. So the question that has stayed with me over the past 10 years or so in the work that I've done, and something that I come back to often, is why is it that only about 2 to 3% of the global adult population develop a gambling problem or a gambling disorder? And further, what are the conditions under which gambling problems will develop or occur and maintain over time? And I'm not really an public health person. I hung out with a lot of public health researchers in my former job, and they always like to talk about protective factors and risk factors. And that's a really great thing to know, but I really want to know more at an individualized level about what was this person, what is this individual, what are the conditions under which they are more or less likely to gamble? And from a behavioral perspective, in addition to these risk factors, problem gambling can occur as a result of consequences, right? What happens after we gamble? And we know, those of you who have taken maybe an intro to ABA class, or you get like the paragraph on Watson in your intro to psych class, that we know that consequences are best when immediate and powerful. Right? We have to have immediate and powerful consequences for the best outcome. And if engaging in gambling results in immediate, powerful reinforcers or consequences, be that escape from something aversive in their life, some type of physiological release or dopaminergic high, or a social interaction, if that happens when they gamble and we dangle weak reinforcers or delayed reinforcers as a means to treat or intervene, we will lose every single time. In fact, when you look at the gambling treatment literature, cognitive behavior therapy is considered a best practice and kind of like the gold star for gambling disorders. However, I've never seen a CBT study that didn't have at least 20 to 30% of the sample not stay, gambling free within a 3, 6 to a year month follow-up. That to me is not good enough. We need to hit those 25 to 30% of those individuals who are seeking treatment. And so one alternative strategy is to identify not only why a person is gambling, but how to help that person tolerate that delay to either that same reinforcer or potentially identify alternative reinforcers completely. And so we did this with my predecessor, my mentor, Mark Dixon, and we established the Gambling Functional Assessment 2, where we kind of look to see, can we identify just with a survey why people are gambling? And it turns out that, yeah, we can, right? So we can kind of itemize these questions out into either sensory seeking, escape, access to social attention, or access to tangibles, or like the things that the casinos typically give you, like the food, the drink tokens, etc. And we get reasonable outcomes when we then plot the GFA2 scores across the SOGS. The SOGS is the South Oaks Gambling Screen. It is a common diagnostic tool that correlates pretty nicely with the DSM-5 category of somebody that has a problem with gambling. The higher the SOGS score, the more likely they have a problem or disorder with gambling. And you can see here that there's a nice correlation between higher SOG score and higher GFA2 scores. So why is this important? Well, it's because we can then use that to really kind of say, yes, that survey can and does actually identify different and idiosyncratic conditions under which that person will gamble or not. So what's interesting, and what I want you to pay attention to with this figure here, is that these 5 individuals were asked to play on 4 different slot machines that were each paired with a different program consequence, right? They either got attention from the researcher, they got escape from like coming back and doing it again, they got more tokens, or one of the machines had the sensory component, like with the lights and the sounds when they won. And so what we did is we toggled back and forth between free play when all 4 machines were available versus a test sequence where we had one machine that was off, usually the one that was most or played most often in the previous condition. We turned that machine off to see what would happen. And what you can see here, again, it doesn't matter what machine it is that turns off, but when we turn it on and turn it off, when we go from free play to then all but one machine, we get differentiation in responding, meaning that people really are playing because of what's happening afterwards, and that can be something that we can control for. Interestingly enough too, and it's only anecdotal data, but the GFA2 aligned with 4 of the 5 of these participants. So that's pretty good preliminary data, but again, more is needed before we can rest our hat on that. So in addition to the consequences under which gambling may maintain or even produce a problem gambling, another factor that I have been looking into is rules and how rules can impact our behavior. And we can all probably agree that there are loads of rules in our everyday environment, right? Think about all the rules that you follow just to get into the Zoom room today. And that can be very adaptive and helpful for you. But we also know from some of the behavior analytic work on rules that sometimes rules can actually get in the way of our behavior, meaning that if we continue to follow a rule, even though the environment doesn't produce or support the rule, we would then argue that that's rigid rule following. I'm unable to adapt to my environment. And as a result, now I might then lead into or result in maladaptive behavior, right? So from some of the work on rule-governed behavior within a behavioral analytic capacity, we know that rule following occurs through rule formation, contacting, stating, and then subsequent following. We also know that rules function as discriminative stimuli or consequences, depending upon the functional relationship. And this avenue has led to my own work in this area to kind of try to understand how rule following is then impacted in a gambling context. And so one of the things that we've been looking at in my lab is not just the rules and then the consequences or the external environmental changes, but also some of the physiological responses. So the dopaminergic activation, the neurological, the biological impacts of when you win versus when you almost win, or when you get 7-7 and it's like right above the line and you're like, oh, right? That physiological impulse then we can start to understand then how the psychological responses, things like increased motivation, cognitive distortions, like things like this can now start to be formed, and not just formed, but then maintained and actually reinforced over time. And so there are 2 primary things that psychologists like to focus on within a gambling or problem gambling context, particularly the illusion of control or the gambler's fallacy and cognitive distortions. And so I like to think about these 2 things as when you then take all of these physiological responses, psychological responses, and even those external environmental changes, and now in the presence of that same slot machine outcome or gambling outcome, you start to see their verbal behavior change. And an example of the gambler's fallacy would be when you hear something like, this machine is hot, a jackpot is coming, I can feel it, I just won $2, I know, $1,000 win is coming. That is real. I've heard my own clients say that to me, which when you can say, really, the machine's hot, touch it. Is it? Unfortunately, yes, the slot machine is hot because it's running on electricity, but not in the way that they're metaphorically getting at with that gambler's fallacy. It can also show up as an illusion of control. The illusion of control is this idea or belief that the gambler controls an outcome that is actually uncontrollable, right? So I actually just was consulting on a case where the woman said that she used to take her player's card out if the machine, or after a losing streak, because then she would take it out and put it back in, take it out and put it back in, take it out and put it back in, because that would bring her good luck. Okay, there is nothing programmed in the machine that says if you take out your player's card and put it back in, that's going to mean that you win the next hand you pull. But she believed that as an actual fact. And so these various associations between physiological, psychological, and even environmental outcomes are things that my research team and my lab has started to explore, particularly then in how people follow rules and how they maintain over time. And I think we're supposed to stop in about 20 minutes. Is that correct, Sean? Okay. So I'm going to skip some of these because I want to get to the clinical data. But essentially what we've been looking at is we start with a baseline play and we get them to actually state a rule. We go through rule training, and then we see afterwards if they actually follow the rule in a traditional multiple baseline setup, in a single subject design setup. So the first study we looked at was we gave them red coins, silver coins, and we said, hey, if you follow these symbols here that were on the slot machine, you'll get finished with the study quicker. We replicated it then on a roulette wheel and said, hey, if you study these symbols here, you'll get finished with the study quicker. We then trained them on a 3x3 stimulus class, where essentially the rule of play red or silver coins was established as a cross-network stimulus class, or win big by betting on black or red was established during the training. When we then asked them to rate, or tell us what each one of those symbols meant, right? This was when we got them to, tell us what the symbol or the symbols were by stating the rule. You can see here on the left-hand side that all of the participants were able to accurately label or tack the rule. Except for, participant 3 came in and knew the rule at pre, even though they actually didn't follow it. And so what you can see here is at baseline, we get variable to some type of like all or nothing response, particularly with participants 4 and 5. But then they follow the rule. We get 4 out of 6 of these guys to follow the rule, with delayed rule following in some of them, right? So this guy was delayed rule following. When we replicated it on the roulette wheel, again, every single person could not identify the rule prior to training, but afterwards they could. And again, following our interventions, every single one of these individuals played on the color that we trained them to, like win big by betting on red or black. And when they came back a week later for follow-up, and it maintained, they got no additional rule training during the 1 week follow-up, and they still were able to maintain that response. Then we wanted to say, okay, well, how much of this is because the stimuli are in the environment during the training? So then 3 subjects, we replicated again on the slot machine and on the roulette. 3 subjects got this with the rule in the environment. 3 did not have the rule in the environment. And again, before training, nobody can do it. After training, everybody can do it, except for a couple of them at follow-up dipped below 100%. And when we look at the data here, you see that the folks that had the rule in the environment, they were able to engage in the rule following, both post-training and at the 1 month follow-up, somewhat with participant 3, right? There was some kind of differentiation in responding. We would like to see those data pass a little bit wider. However, what's interesting here is that in the no rule environment, only one person slowly started to engage in the rule that was trained. The other 2 did not. Meaning that without the rule in the environment, when we put them back in on the slot machine, that rule training meant nothing. This is really key when we talk about clinical practice, because we all just want to give folks rules in our clinical sessions. And then what happens when they go back into their life outside of your therapy room? What are you bringing into their life that will help those rules then maintain? So we did this again, but I'm going to skip over this for time because I want to get to the clinical practice. I just want to highlight 3 folks here. They were disordered gamblers that had pretty high SOG scores at intake. Each one had a different goal of therapy. 2 were to gamble responsibly. 1 was to abstain from gambling completely. And I just want to kind of show you kind of what some single subject clinical case study data could look like, right? So the top panel here, this was like a thought journal that they had to complete every time they came into session. We asked them how believable were their thoughts to gamble, how close were they to living with their values, how close were they to never living or gambling again. And you can see over time that believability of their Mary's thoughts anyway decreased. Close to living with her values though stayed the same across, right? That's probably not what you want to see in clinical practice. You would hopefully, if you're using an acceptance and mindfulness-based intervention like ACT, one that targets values, that you would want to see that change. So that was something we worked on again later. But here you can see that gambling duration is represented by the blue bar graphs, and gambling frequency is represented by the yellow data points. You can see though that immediately following treatment, we had suppression in gambling, which she still is gambling, because remember, Mary wanted to have responsible gambling. So she did want to continue to gamble once or twice a week, which she was able to then do. However, you all are going to soon be psychologists. Is this okay? Do you consider this person, quote unquote, treated and done? Is she okay to go back out into the world and she doesn't need any more gambling therapy? I don't know. No, if the goal is abstinence, but maybe she's been able to maintain it. This is something we need more research on in a harm reduction strategy. Here's somebody else. Here's Sue. Totally different thought data, right? Look at her thought data all over the place. Cyclical as well, right? You see huge spikes in believability, meaning the thoughts to gamble were very believable about every 4 weeks or so. And then inverse kind of cycling with the close to never gambling again. Again, you see her gambling duration. She continued to gamble at least 6 hours a week, even though the number of days she was gambling was decreasing over time. That is not a good outcome, right? This is not something you would want to say, yeah, great, you're done, because this means that she's now going for less amount of days, but for the same amount of time. It's another demonstration of tolerance, right? The extent to which she needs more gambling, even though she's going less days a week. And then Paul, he wanted to abstain completely from gambling. So again, if you just look here, you see that nice kind of deviation again, where believability decreases, close to living with the values kind of stagnates out as well. However, you do see decreased and gambling with 3 consecutive weeks of no gambling towards the end. Again, is he okay? Or would you get this data and go, yeah, great, you're cured, bye, you never have to see me again? No, probably not, right? This is probably just the beginning of his recovery, and now is into how can you sustain not gambling? So, to conclude, I have shown you a glimpse into some research and how research can kind of guide clinical practice in gambling. And one of the things that I've been focusing on is this interplay between research and particularly translational clinical research into clinical practice. And I hope that you've seen here that it's not just about research and clinical practice, it's also about real-time accessibility, rules that people then formulate once they are engaging in gambling or trying to stop gambling, and then the whole risk and wager aspect of gambling in and of itself. So I thank you for your time today. I know that was a lot of information to take in at home, by the way, for the last 45 minutes. My email is up on the screen. Please feel free to email me or let me know if you have any questions. And hopefully now, Sean, you've been getting some questions that we can chat further about.
Yeah, I actually thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. That was wonderful. I'm sorry, Tracy, did you have a comment? I don't know.
Yeah, I had a student question. So a student wanted to know what you think about places like Chuck E. Cheese and if the types of games there might encourage gambling behavior in adulthood.
Yes, they definitely encourage gambling in adulthood. I think there's been a couple of studies that have actually shown that. That are kind of got at the correlation between the Chuck E. Cheese type events and whatnot. Yeah, I think that it shows that we kind of program them young, if you will, to kind of understand this idea of how to engage on a variable schedule, right? So just because you put a token in doesn't mean you're going to win the prize, but it does then establish using more tokens to see if you can get larger prizes, or, if you want the big teddy bear, you have to get 1,000 tickets. Now, how do you get 1,000 tickets? Well, you can have to get that over time. So yeah, I do. There is definitely correlations between the two. And I think the casino industry knows this. I mean, any of you have walked into, maybe outside of Kentucky, but particularly casinos in Nevada, when you drop them off at the kiddie place, it's filled with games like that. They're just like kind of getting them ready for then when you go on to play the big time slot machines, So yeah, good question.
So I had a couple of additional questions. One is from Dr. Mong. She was wondering about the resistance for Hawaii and what is their influence? What influence do they have, and sort of I guess their consideration about the legal dimension of this. And I also I have one that I'll bounce myself off of that as well, which is more just about if you have any sort of professional opinion about the legality of gambling and some of those regulations. Like, do you as a professional feel that is that sort of more sweeping bans are a policy remedy that you feel is appropriate, or what thoughts you have on that more broadly? So.
Yeah, those are good questions. So I have no opinion either way, right? So, and a lot of what I do is I toe the line of saying I don't really have an opinion if gambling is good or bad, or if it should be illegal or legal. I think that it can definitely be a source of entertainment. I mean, I'm born and raised in Nevada, so I have a different worldview because, it was normal to see slot machines in the grocery store, in the bank. And, like that wasn't odd for us to, instead of going to church, my family would go to the casino on Sunday and then drop us off in the little kiddie zone. And, so like, I don't really have an opinion if it's good or bad. I do believe in the nod towards responsible gaming. I do think that the industry has a responsibility to make sure that they keep their patrons safe. If you think about, we do this in where you can consume and imbibe alcohol, right? If the bartender thinks that you've had too much, he then or she is not able to then serve you another drink. We have rules around how you can't drink and drive, and if you do, there's massive penalties for it. And you're seeing more of that now in the United States, particularly in the UK, though, for sure, around responsible gaming from an industry perspective, because problem gambling in a casino is bad for everybody, right? If I'm watching somebody and they're banging on their machine and they're like breaking down because now the machine hasn't won, that's not fun for me. Why do I want to sit there with, watching that as somebody who may not have a problem? So it's good for everybody to put responsible gaming nets to keep everybody safe. Now, to kind of think about the Hawaii and why Hawaii has been resistant to it, that's a really great question. I don't know specifically on why Hawaii has been resistant. I know, just like anecdotally, I like to share the fun fact that as of at least 2016, I haven't checked to update to see if that was still the case after 2016, Hawaii was the biggest importer of pornography in the United States. So as a process addiction, I'm kind of like, well, I don't know, tomato, instead of gambling. Now they're just moving to a different process addiction, maybe. But I don't know. I also think too that Hawaii relies heavily on tourism. And so there might also be some political stuff around the tourism states and, stakeholders, and whether or not they could have access to building and gambling. We'll see. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Another student asked if someone close to you is gambling, what are the first steps, or what can you do, or how do you know if it needs treatment?
Yeah, that's a Excellent question. So the first thing to do is to remain open and not judgmental, right? So just like any other substance use or process addiction, right? You never want to shame somebody. You never want to guilt them into seeking treatment. And my colleagues and I always want to stress, like, you got to have the conversation, right? Have a conversation in an open and compassionate way to say things like, hey, I've noticed that, you've been going to the casino more than recently. What's going on? What's happening with you? Maybe even reach out to them and say, hey, you want to do something fun tonight? And they're like, yeah, let's go to the casino. You're like, actually, what if we go to a park, or what if we go to a movie? And figuring out a different way to rearrange what you do together could also benefit that person. And because sometimes it's really hard to have those conversations. And so sometimes it's just about knowing the resources around you in your area, right? So most states have some type of 1-800 number or a gambling hotline that you can call, and you can get access to resources. Maybe you can suggest to your friend or family member that you go to a GA meeting, and you can go with them because they have a Gamblers Anonymous or a Gam-Anon meeting as well, right? So for family members and loved ones who don't have a gambling problem. But again, I can't stress enough, you got to be non-judgmental and open, and you can't point fingers and blame because that just kind of then pushes them further away. Reminding them that you're there for them, reminding them that they don't have to struggle alone, sometimes can just be enough to open the door for them to start talking about what they are experiencing.
I actually had a couple of additional questions. Wanted to real quick, I guess just one that we'll probably have time to get to. Real quick, wanted to mention that I did post a link in the chat for those needing continuing education credits. There's a link to a form there. If you could just fill that out, that'll take care of that. Also had a question from a student relating to how this, I guess, the relationship between problem gambling and sort of token economies, or anything along those lines. If you, I guess, just sort of broadly, what questions did you have? And then I know Mike wants to make one additional comment before we sign off for the evening. So we'll make that our last question and take it from, and then Mike can take it from there.
Yeah, sure. I think if I saw that and come up in the chat, the token economy, we were talking about the kids, right? And so it was like the same time we were talking about kids and token systems. There's been some interesting data coming out of Kevin Littall's lab, who's a behavior analyst, who's actually looked to see that when you do have jackpots in a token system, like the mystery prize in a token system, it actually doesn't produce what we would consider compulsive behaviors like we see on a slot machine. And I think that's probably because of either the populations that we're looking at, or we're not arranging it in the same way like a slot machine. Like, people aren't working to get access to the money like they on a slot machine. Slot machines are just like pressing a button and seeing what happens. It's not like I do a math task or a clean my room task before getting the mystery prize. But in terms of how yes, you definitely see token systems. If you think about like the example I gave, like if you want the big stuffed animal and it takes 1,000 tickets, well, you have to collect enough tickets before you have enough to get access to the big bear. And that functions as a token system, right? Because you have to get multiple conditioned reinforcers before you can then go access the primary one. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it will like resemble some type of compulsive behavior if you set up a token system, if I'm addressing your question. Dr. Bertieri?
Great. No, thank you so much. This was wonderful and so exciting to see these applications. I particularly enjoyed your attention to, the idea of like, if a treatment doesn't work for everyone, then we need better treatments. And I think that's so exciting to see sort of personalized data and how single subject design, looking at the individual and not just an average, can really help us to develop more effective treatments. That was just wonderful. And yeah, as the shameless plug that I asked to throw in briefly is, I think that shows the power of behavior analysis and how taking that individual level takes these group principles, but then individualize it. And just looking at your treatment data, it was wonderful to see just across 3 different clients how the functions differed and the trajectory of treatments differed. And that's really exciting. And if folks who are watching are excited, the Applied Behavior Analysis track here in the department offers some opportunities to get more training in that. As you know, Dr. Wilson presented some wonderful visual analysis. We actually see the data come to life. And then that is, if you're intrigued by those figures and want to learn more about how to interpret them, generate your own and kind of approach behavior change and treatment from that perspective, classes in the track are a great opportunity. And Dr. Nastali is with us here in the audience as well. And then Alyssa, Becky, and I all actually got to overlap a bit in graduate school. So that can be an opportunity to kind of continue and further in some of this work. So that Monday at 5 p.m. on Zoom is an open house around ABA and learning more about the track. And you're welcome to kind of continue the conversation there. And thank you again so much, Dr. Wilson. This was such a wonderful presentation and so neat to see kind of the future of what treatments could look like for this area. Because, the unfortunate side of your presentation also notes this is not a problem that's going away on its own. It seems like this is only going to get worse and we need more effective treatment. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all.
Excellent. So I think that the faculty were going to stick around a little bit and chat about a couple of things. And for all of our other participants, thank you for attending. And we'll see you later.